Hey guys, welcome to what it was like for online learning. This is me at my house doing a flip lesson on the presidency, and let's just try to make it go quickly. Yeah? Yeah, okay. Cool. Very first and foremost, the requirements to be a president, you have to be 35, a natural born U.S. citizen, and a resident of the United States for 14 years over the course of your 35 years of living. Those are the things that are written in the Constitution, and I guess every single president has followed with those things. It's the only office in the United States that you can get without actually being. Sorry, it's the only office that's restricted only to people born in the United States. And originally, 35 was kind of old, and now we recognize that that's not that old, but that is the actual requirements for president, which leads us to, well, the next thing about what presidents are usually like. If these are the only requirements, these are traits that the textbook suggests that all of the presidents have. Used to do this in a kind of fun way, I thought, where we tried to like think about what traits did people like to accuse Donald Trump not of having. I thought it was interesting and an interesting way to approach it. And so if you click those blue links, there's some articles about times where he has not or was not that. But for the most part, like, willingness to change strategies, inherits prior societies and deals with the problems, thick skin, puts country before themselves, surrounds himself with differing viewpoints, and has a readiness to act and a comfort in deciding, is what the textbook says are all traits that commonly exist with presidents. Um, with that being said, Donald Trump, well, he definitely was ready to act. We always say that that one's good, but differing viewpoints, not so much. His cabinet was very similar to himself in terms of money and also experience and also race and also um, those things. Country before self, I'm not even going to. You should click that article because it's absurd. Thick skinned, well, you can think about Twitter. Inherits prior society and dealt with the problems. Every president blames the president before them, and so it's not something that's atypical that Donald Trump blamed Obama for the problems, because Obama blamed Bush. And so while we might think about that as like, nah, he didn't do that, it's very common to just blame the prior president. So we're okay with what Trump did probably here. And lastly, willingness to change strategies. I don't know if he changed that many strategies. Um, but yeah, there you go. So that's a prior president. Secondly, they say they also tend to be these different things, adjectives that you would use to describe them. Um, this is a really interesting article talking about people that win the national seat and how people that are more likely to be attractive or handsome, regardless of gender, are more likely to win, and how attractiveness is actually more important in terms of a voter boost than um, skills and or competence and something else. But it's a really interesting article if you're curious. Other things, they're all religious. Um, Almost every single president has been a believer in some sort of higher being, with JFK being our only Catholic. Well, Biden's Catholic? I think so. Um, Handsome, whatever. Family centered. We've only had one president ever who was a bachelor. That was James Buchanan. And not to make it weird, but his sister was his first lady because you need a first lady. Um, don't be weird about it. His sister was his first lady. But beyond that, like every other president has had a family, and Donald Trump is the only one that was on his third wife, but that's another story. Clever, most of them have a degree in something. Smart, well, I guess that's the same. And lastly, go getter. I don't know. It's what the textbook said. Don't get angry at me. Cool. Here's a really fun video if you're like Nerdwriter. He's one of my favorite YouTube video essayists talking about and looking and analyzing the words that Trump versus Bernie Sanders used in just answering a random question. They said when Trump was running for president, a lot of his answers were at a fourth grade level, which isn't necessarily a bad thing when we really think about, trying to convince people to listen to you. On the flip side, Bernie Sanders and his answer, I think, was at a 10th grade level, so you guys probably shouldn't watch that because it would be too much for you, eh? Finally, previous job experience, you can see what all of them have and have not done. And this final note is the most important note on this slide. It was the fact that, while we talk about all the presidents, and what they had done. Donald Trump was the only president that we've ever had in U.S. history that had no prior public service experience. 15 were vice presidents. The ones that didn't serve in government came pretty much directly from the army, like Eisenhower over here. And here's a picture of Jimmy Carter being a peanut farmer back in the day. There's a crazy story about Jimmy Carter and how he was a Democrat and the Republicans forced him to sell his share of his family's peanut farm because it might seem like the president has mixed interests if he owned a peanut farm and was also a president. And think about how far we've came from that when the president sold his share in the peanut farm to the president hosted foreign people and other delegates and had official meetings at a business that he owned in order, and presumably he or his estate got money because of they held these meetings at that place. It's an interesting change that we have between those two guys. Well, furthermore, amendments that deal with the presidency. There's only 4. Each one I'll talk about. Amendment 12 I remember because it's 1 and 2. And the 12th Amendment just says this: the president and vice president run together. Originally, the person that got first became president. The person that got second became vice president. So if this amendment did not exist, Joe Biden and Donald Trump would be president, and Donald Trump would be vice president, right? But that amendment was made after the election of 1800 because, well, the first 2 elections, after the 3rd election, because everyone wanted George Washington to be president. But after the 3rd election, they realized that's probably a bad idea. Amendment 20 just says that the president's term does not start until January 20th. It is called the lame duck amendment because originally the president would take over on March 4th, and they moved it from March 4th to January 20th, which meant that the period after the election only lasted from November to January 20th instead of November to March. Originally, it was kind of necessary because it took a long time to tabulate votes, but as technology increased, that period became shorter, and now it's better that the new president takes over because they call the old president a lame duck because they are ineffective in office. And so it's called the lame duck amendment, and the new president takes over sooner because of it. 22, super simple. After FDR over here, the president can only serve 2 terms. Technically, the max amount of time a president can serve is 10 years. That would be if someone was a vice president, then the president died halfway through the term, they could finish out that term and then serve 2 more terms of their own. So technically, Joe Biden was inaugurated on January 20th, 2021. That date passed a month and a half ago. So if he died today, Kamala Harris could be president for the rest of this year, the rest of next year, and then be reelected twice if she so wanted to. And it would be good under the 22nd Amendment. The final one is who takes over if the president dies. Limits the president to 2 terms. That's my memory device. This one, the memory device is 25, if the president's not alive. And it just says who takes over if the president dies. Y'all know the vice president's second. The next person would be the Speaker of the House. Then it's the oldest person from the Senate, and then it goes cabinet members in order of the date that the cabinet department was created. There's 15 cabinet departments. The oldest one is the Secretary of State, and so Anthony Blinken would take over if this person died, and this person died in a car accident. And if Anthony Blinken and the rest of the cabinet dies, well, then the last person that would take over would be the Department of Homeland Security's head, whose name I do not know right now. But the important thing is, if all of them died at once, as the question usually goes, who knows what would happen? It's never happened, and it probably won't. All right, this is probably the most important slide of today's little mini flipped classroom lesson, so let's talk about it. This talks about the 3 different roles in the White House and how they've changed over time. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Very first and foremost, the First Lady, what the Constitution says is nothing, right? Its original job was just to be like the host for foreign people that came over, right? To be the lady of the house that would just welcome people as they came over, set up dinners, make it look nice. The trailblazing member that we usually talk about is Nancy Reagan. Nancy Reagan, what she did was she started up DARE, and she started up that drug thing that you did in fifth grade to try to convince you not to use drugs. And because she took up that cause, every single vice president, there's Nancy Reagan, every single first lady after her has picked up a cause. And that's not Nancy Reagan, that's Nancy Reagan, that's Bush's, old Bush, young Bush, Clinton, Michelle. Um, every single vice lady after her has picked up a cause, and that has been what they fought for 4 years. I don't know what Jill Biden's is because I'm a bad person, but Melania ironically was stopping cyberbullying. Cool. And so how it's changed over time, it went from lady of the house to person who influences policy and gets money and has an entire like bunch of people work for her even though she's not elected. Think about how weird that is, right? Number 2, what the Constitution says. The vice president breaks votes in the Senate and breaks votes in the Senate. Its original job was maybe to take over if the president dies, but I want you to understand that before the 25th Amendment, it wasn't sure, right? When Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, his wife was the person that made his decisions, which kind of makes sense. Who knows what the president wants more than his wife? But it also doesn't make sense because, well, then what the heck is the vice president for? The trailblazing person that we usually talk about, his name is thinking, Walter Mondale. Thank you so much for waiting. Walter Mondale, uh, when he was the vice president, he expanded the power of the vice president, the office of the vice presidency, so that they became more of an advisor to the president. And so maybe you're too young to think about when George W. Bush, Barack Obama and Joe Biden were in the White House, but like they, were friends. They would talk back and forth. It was kind of weird between Trump and Pence, but nonetheless, like your vice president and your president are supposed to be people that they can bounce ideas off of, and is the second person in command now, whereas it was not that before, right? It used to be called the most pointless office. And so just like the power of the presidency's expanded, so too has the power of the vice president. The final one is the cabinet. What the Constitution says is the president can have advisors, right? It doesn't say what they are, but the original members of the cabinet it was 4 things that they decided we needed, 4 important advisors to the president. And so when they thought about the U.S. government in the beginning, there were 4 cabinet positions. There was the Secretary of State, there was the Secretary of the Army or military, Navy, I don't know, but it was a military guy. It was the Postmaster General, who was Benjamin Franklin, the guy in charge of the post office, which is the only one of these 4 that is no longer in existence. So the Postmaster General is not in the line of succession. And then the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. So there were 4 in the beginning, and then as the nation expanded, we added more positions. There's no trailblazing member, but what we can say is, and on the day that we talk about the cabinet, we're going to see how it expanded. And we'll see how, like, we added the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. We added the Department of Labor after the Department of Energy in the 1960s when people started caring more about energy. We added the Department of Agriculture in the 1920s when we decided to start becoming more of an industrial society and more of a national, trading society. So we add departments as needed. And one more time, I feel like I want to say Postmaster General as a question for what was one of the original 4 that no longer exists. So write that down. Final things, benefits, last slide. Hey, this is why I guess you would want to be the president. My favorite thing on this slide is right here. You can see the Secret Service code names for people. I think George W. Bush's code name was Thumper, and Bill Clinton was Evergreen, and it's kind of cool to look at. Besides that, you get to live in the White House, you get a personal retreat in Virginia, you get a car and Air Force One, and fun fact, whatever plane the president's on gets the call sign of Air Force One. So if he was in like a tiny Cessna, it would become Air Force One. Marine One is what you call the helicopter that he's in also. And lastly, you get Secret Service for life. And your kids get it until you're 18. So yeah, that's that, and good job.